The air was thick and hot. Alice sat on her porch swatting at mosquitoes. They swarmed around her, hungry for her blood. One landed on her arm. She slapped at it, but it was too late. The mosquito had already bitten her. Alice went inside, scratching her arm. It was just an itchy bite. Nothing to worry about. She had no idea that bite would change her life forever. She had no idea it would turn her into a monster. Alice woke up the next morning feeling even worse. She was burning with fever. Sunlight scorched her skin. She hid in the shadows, terrified of what was happening to her. Her reflection in the mirror was even more terrifying. Her skin was pale, almost translucent. Her eyes were now a deep, unsettling red, and her teeth? They were undeniably fangs, sharp and menacing. Panic seized her. She had to see a doctor. Maybe there was still time to stop this, to find a cure. But deep down, a part of her knew the truth. She was no longer human. The mosquito bite had transformed her into something else. The water tasted like nothing. It did nothing to quench the burning in her throat. Alice needed something else. Something thicker, richer, something metallic. She stumbled out of her house and into the night. The darkness felt comforting, shielding her from the sun's burning rays. She could smell everything now. The damp earth, the blooming jasmine, and most intensely, the pulse of lifeblood coursing through the veins of every living creature around her. An old man wandered into her path, his beautiful smile gleaming in the moonlight. Alice's heart pounded, not with fear but with a horrifying hunger. The thirst was unbearable, she had to feed. There was no fighting it, no resisting the monster she had become, the monster the mosquito bite had created. The next morning, the neighborhood was in an uproar. Mrs. Henderson's father, Clive, was found dead in the park, drained of all his blood. The police were baffled. There were no bite marks, no signs of a struggle, just 2 puncture wounds on Clive's neck and an eerie absence of blood. No one suspected Alice. She stayed locked in her house, curtains drawn, her reflection a constant reminder of the terrifying creature she had become. The guilt gnawed at her, but the thirst was stronger. She needed to feed again, and soon. Nightfall couldn't come soon enough. As darkness enveloped the city, Alice slipped out of her house, her skin tingling with a dreadful anticipation. She was a predator now, and the city was her hunting ground. Section 5. A detective's nightmare. Detective Miller ran a hand through his hair, his eyes bloodshot. 2 more victims, both drained of blood, the same puncture wounds on their necks. The city was in a frenzy. Rumors of a vampire were running wild. Miller scoffed at the idea. Vampires? Ridiculous. There had to be a logical explanation, but what? The evidence was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was like something out of a horror movie. His gaze fell on the newspaper on his desk. Vampire attacks continue, the headline screamed. Miller tossed the paper aside, a shiver running down his spine. He couldn't shake the feeling that this case was about to get a whole lot stranger. Section 6. Cornered. Alice darted through the shadows, her senses on high alert. Detective Miller was getting close. She could feel it. He was relentless, determined to catch her, but she was faster, stronger. She ducked into a narrow alleyway, her back pressed against the cool brick wall. Her heart pounded in her chest. She had to get out of the city, find somewhere to disappear. But where? Suddenly, a bright light pierced the darkness. Footsteps echoed in the narrow passage. Alice was trapped. Section 7. Captured. Alice? Detective Miller's voice echoed in the alleyway. He sounded surprised, disbelieving. Alice stepped into the light, her eyes blazing red. There was no point in hiding anymore. She was caught. Miller stared at her, his face a mixture of fear and disbelief. He reached for his handcuffs, his hand trembling. "You're under arrest," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Alice didn't resist. She let him cuff her, a strange sense of relief washing over her. The hunt was over, but the nightmare was far from finished. Section 8. Escape. The police station buzzed with activity. Alice sat in the interrogation room, her eyes fixed on the table. She could hear Miller and the other officers talking outside, their voices hushed and urgent. "There's no way she's just a woman," one of them said. "Those eyes, and those teeth." Alice smiled humorlessly. They had no idea. Suddenly the lights flickered and died. The room was plunged into darkness. Screams echoed through the station. Alice's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. This was her chance. When the lights flickered back on, Alice was gone. The bars on the window were bent outward, as if by an inhuman force. The only evidence of her escape was the lingering scent of decay and the chilling silence that followed. Section 9. A City in Fear. The city held its breath. Alice was out there, somewhere in the shadows. The newspapers had a field day. The word vampire splashed across every front page. Detective Miller sat in his darkened office, staring at the bent bars on the interrogation room window. He knew, deep down, that this was far from over. Alice was out there, and she would hunt again, be thirsty again, and when she did, the city would tremble in fear. The mosquito bite had unleashed a monster, and now no one was safe. The night belonged to Alice.